I think a key part of protecting Black women is also protecting their hearts, their minds, and their spirits. And men like Kevin Samuels do not protect Black women in that way. I'm Satta.
And I'm Jaretta. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing well today. How's everything going with you, sis?
Good, can't complain.
Yeah.
Woke up this morning, and I have on my nice, to go along with the theme of what we're talking about today, this dress that says, I am Black woman, beautiful, magic, intelligent, resilient, love, innovative, powerful, influential, unapologetic. And there's a picture of a beautiful Black woman with her head tied, with her head wrap, her headscarf. I'll stand up a little bit.
Very nice. I like the colors.
So, thank you, Amazon Prime.
I might have to cop that. So you got to send me the link.
Yeah. I'm still waiting on my Leah Maya t-shirt. So once I get that, then we can do
Mad
a trade.
Rag. I think because I got that t-shirt like a couple weeks ago. So I'll check Mad Rag to see if it's still there. But if I do find it, it's on me.
All right, thank you. And same here. So we'll do a little swap. But so what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, we're going to just be talking about Black women because here at Sis Please, we often say that we have unapologetic, authentic conversations. And I feel like we should talk about Black women, particularly Black women not feeling supported, protected. Because I don't know about you, sis. I've been seeing a lot of foolishness on the internet, but what else is new about Black women and misogyny, misogynoir? We're gonna get all into it.
People are gonna need a
don't worry, Jaretta, the woke teacher got you covered.
Yeah, all these woke terms, these young millennial terms, people are gonna need to have them defined.
No, don't worry, so. I got you. But no, just wanted to talk about Black women not feeling protected by those who we're in community with. And Malcolm X said it best. Even though he died many, many decades ago, he still said it best. And it's still applicable today, right? That Black women are the most unprotected and disrespected women in society. Yes, people in society. We see it in our communities. We see it on social media incessantly. And even though this happened a couple of months ago, I'm still outraged and still pissed about just the whole backlash that Meg Thee Stallion received, to the point where she's in social media hiatus. And that still pisses me off.
And then to that point, Jaretta, we did some research and pulled up some statistics. We're not just pulling things out of the blue here. There's research to back up what you're saying, what Malcolm X said prophetically all those decades ago. So there's a study by the Institute for Women's Policy Research that showed Black women are murdered at a higher rate than any other group of women. There's also separate research by the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control that Black women experience intimate partner violence at rates 35% higher than white women. And then there's also the unique challenges Black women face when they seek justice and protection when they are harmed. So they're not believed when they report violence and are more likely to be punished for defending themselves against an abuser. So it's like we can't win. And I think you mentioned the Meg Thee Stallion incident, which is, perfectly aligned with this, but also the Chris Brown and Rihanna incident from 2009. Until this day, I'll randomly see comments with people blaming Rihanna for the violence that was inflicted against her. And it's the same thing with Megan Thee Stallion, that somehow she did something to deserve it. There's also this undercurrent. I feel like when a woman has more agency over her own body and is very in control of her sexuality and owns it, that somehow she doesn't deserve to be protected, or even worse, that she invites harm to herself by being so open and free with who she is and with her femininity. And I don't think that that's fair. And also there's a larger societal context here. I mean, if you think historically about the image of the damsel in distress, it's not a Black woman. It's never been a Black woman. So that sends a message that only certain women are worth saving, that only certain women are worth protection. So that's really unfortunate. But I think another thing that is important to hit home on in this conversation is that especially with the the Stallion and the Rihanna incidents, sometimes we as a Black community excuse the bad behavior of Black men that do harm to Black women. And I don't think that that's right. And I think it, and I'm not excusing this in the least, but it comes from a place or this desire to protect Black men in a world that doesn't often value
Mm.
their life. But we can't, that's still no excuse. We can't, that defense can't come at the expense of
Yeah,
Black
I think
women.
two things could be true at the same time. I think just a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
especially Black women and Black men, are in pain, and like acknowledging that, but
Mm-hmm.
also there should also be space for Black women. Kind of going back to the Meg the Stallion thing, because I think it's so interesting, right? And I often see this on social media too. It's all good when Megan is shaking her ass on Instagram, with the hot, yes, with the
Entertaining us.
WAP and the hotties, and but when she was going through probably the most toughest time, because I learned a little bit about her backstory, lost her grandma,
Her mom
lost
passed.
her
Yeah.
mom, her dad passed away a couple years ago. Then you're on like the top of your career, and then this happens to you. And even like when I
Mm-hmm.
didn't follow the trial too closely, but I did hear like in her testimony, she said, the reason why I didn't call the police was during the height of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd dying. So she was like, we already have a really bad history with police just due to what we've seen in the media. So just even then, despite her being in pain, taking her, kind of being selfless and saying, hey, this is already a charge time as it is. I'm going to protect this Black man. And
Yeah. Who wasn't protecting her in that moment, but she felt the urge and the desire to protect him, even though he was putting
yeah,
allegedly her
injured.
life
And
in
it's
danger.
so crazy as well because, again, it wasn't until, because during the trial, too, people, Black men, Black women, saying that she's guilty, that she lied. And it wasn't until there was an audio recording that leaked where Tory Lanez was talking to her friend on the phone, Kelsey, about, oh man, I really effed up, da 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 da. Then everybody was quiet. And it's like, damn, why did it have to take a video recording for her to be believed?
Why is the burden of
Yeah.
proof on her when she was the one who
Yeah.
was shot
So
at?
I think it's just really interesting. So giving the history
Yeah.
of what you said too about the damsel in distress and that how that was never really Black women. We think about the stereotypes that originated during the history of slavery that really predicated on the dehumanization of Black women, the stereotypes of the Jezebel. And for those who don't know, the Jezebel, sexually promiscuous, just always free and out there. We think about the mammy stereotype that was originated during slavery times as well, right? Where it was often Black women becoming a wet nurse and really taking care of white families. But that often was portrayed that she was always willing to give to the white families that she took care of, but not the Black families that she birthed, which we know is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also think about the sapphire, right? The sapphire, often a woman who was loud, boisterous. And we hear that all the time, right? I mean, we even say in our little jokes about like the Medeas and these quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
ghetto shows. So it's so interesting that even though these stereotypes that originated hundreds of years ago still exist in our communities today and get played out. I think some people could say that I don't think this at all, but especially in the Meg Thee Stallion case, or even in the case of Rihanna, that they are Jezebels because they love their sexuality, they love their femininity, they love who they are inside.
Yeah, and I think it's insidious. This history still plays out today in so many ways. It may not be as obvious all the time, but it's still there. It's still under the surface. And I think it's important when we have this conversation about protect Black women to talk about, for me, protection isn't just about physical
Exactly.
safety, it's about
I
psychological
agree.
safety. And I know we were going to discuss some times in our lives where we didn't feel protected by people in our own community as Black women. And for me, I feel like there were more times where I felt unprotected psychologically than physically, because I know obviously when you say protect Black women, the thought that comes to mind is sexual violence or physical violence against Black women. And that's a huge part of it. But the psychological and emotional and spiritual part is an important part of the conversation
Yeah.
too. There was a story that I'm going to recount that at first I was hesitant to, because I was, all these years later, I was still like embarrassed by it. But I'm like, I shouldn't be embarrassed by it. The person who did this should be
Mm.
embarrassed by it. So I remember I was 19 years old. I was a sophomore in college at BU, Boston University. And I was a journalism major, so I was taking a feature writing class. And, at the end of a semester, you have to do a big project. So I was going to do like a profile on how the Catholic Church was diversifying. Because at that time, I think it was like 2004, 2005, the Catholic Church was majority minority. And that was like the first time in history it ever had happened. There are a lot of Black and brown people joining the Catholic Church at all ranks, leadership ranks, as parishioners. So what does that mean for Catholicism and maybe potentially the highest levels of leadership within the Catholic Church? Maybe we could have a Black Pope someday. So that was the angle for the story. So I was finding sources to interview, and I found this priest in Providence, which is our
Mm.
hometown, to interview. So I left Boston and came to Providence for the day to interview him. And he was actually new at this parish. He was from Nigeria, actually, so
Mm.
West African. So I was excited about it. I was felt comfortable, and I was like, oh, I'm a student journalist. I'm working on this big story and stuff. So I interviewed him. The interview went well, but then at the end of the interview, he gave me this gift, this bag, which is odd. Anyone who's a journalist, like, why is a source giving you a gift? And he gave me this gift in this bag, and he was very adamant. And I was gonna like open it. And he was like, no, wait till you get home to open it. I was like, are you sure? He was like, no, 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 wait till you get home to open it. So I get in the car. I don't wait till I got home. I get in the car and I open it. And you know what was in the
What?
bag? Proactive acne treatment.
What?
This man had given me, because at the time I was 19, I've always like struggled with acne in my teens and my 20s. He gave me Proactive. And now I can look at it and kind of laugh, but it was
What?
so
What?
hurtful at the time. And it was like, so I'm like sitting there in a professional capacity in a sense, and you're judging me and judging my looks. And this mofo, I know he's a priest, lightning God, please don't strike me down. But like clearly, if you have Proactive sitting in your office, you need it too. No one just has Proactive sitting around their office. Like he had acne scarring too. I noticed it, but it's like that's not what I was there for. I was there to do an
Exactly.
interview. But he felt comfortable enough to do that to me. And I felt like he had the audacity to do that to me. And I felt like he wouldn't have done that to a male journalist. And I certainly don't think he would have done that to a 19-year-old white
Not
girl,
at
because the
all.
risk to him would have been too great. And we know the history of Black men and white women, especially with Emmett Till, supposedly catcalling this woman, which I think has been proven to be a lie. And then he gets brutally murdered as a result of it. So I knew this man would not have done that to anyone else, but he felt comfortable to do that to me as a 19-year-old Black
Mm.
girl. And it's like, not only are you a Black man doing this to me, you're a priest. Like, are you serious? So, like, that to me in that moment, I felt psychologically assaulted, because the rest of the day and the rest of the week, I felt bad and felt, I still had to do my story, interview other sources. And I'm like, you know, thinking, are they looking at me and looking, oh my God, her acne is so bad. And the thing is, too, the joke was on him, because I was already using Proactive. Like, clearly it wasn't working. But like,
But it's
so it's just like,
unacceptable. It's unacceptable. Just
yeah, how do
like
you
in a
do that?
professional setting. And let me just say, I'm sorry that that
Hmm.
happened to you, but I think it just goes back to what we talked
Hmm.
about in previous episodes about just how Black women in our skin, we're always, not always, but we're just constantly told by the media and even our own family members, people that we're in community with, that
Hmm.
we're not beautiful, that we need to perform or do your hair. So
And constantly
yeah,
being
do your
judged.
hair some type of way. And it's just like, come on, my African brother, like it's already hard as it is.
And the thing is, he knew what he was doing was wrong, because he was so adamant that I not open the gift in front of
Yeah,
him. You know,
that is
so
so crazy. I mean,
yeah. And the thing is, yeah, it's a microcosm, like you said, of these larger things that are going on in society, and you see this type of behavior play out in other ways in a much larger context. Like you've talked in previous episodes about the manosphere, which you've educated me about, which is like these misogynistic communities and the Kevin Samuels type dudes. I know the man passed away, but we got to talk about him. That thrive on promoting misogyny. And I feel like I think a key part of protecting Black women is also protecting their hearts, their minds, and their spirits. And men like Kevin Samuels do not protect Black women in that way. And in fact, it seems like they find enjoyment and notoriety and fame from degrading
Oh,
Black
because
women.
it
And
makes up, a huge part of their money pockets. Like, because of the
yeah.
hatred and the outrage, and because it's profitable, of course you're gonna have TV shows on YouTube and say crazy things on social media platforms that garner attention, not just from Black women and Black men, but just people in general. Because it's just like, you know, in some ways, I kind of compare it to like a Donald Trump in some ways. Like, we were just so flabbergasted
Hmm.
about this man would say and do a lot of stuff, and yet he became president. Not equating Kevin Samuels to being president, but I think there is something to be said
Yeah,
about people saying outrageous things and not being held accountable because it's profitable.
that's true.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add something, and to be clear, the point of this episode is not a bash Black men episode, but I think in the context of protect Black women, we need to talk about Black women's role in this, like Black men's role in this, rather. And to be clear, I love Black men. I have a Black father. We have Black brothers. I have a Black husband, Black son, Black cousins. We love Black men, but there are times in our lives of Black women when we haven't felt protected by our own community, and that's important. If we're having this conversation, it has to be balanced. We can't just talk about society as a whole not protecting us and then not also mention how there have been times where Black men have not protected the Black women that they claim to
Yeah,
love.
yeah. I think when you were talking about your story, this wasn't particularly Black men, but I do always feel, especially when I was younger too, like, I was always a free spirit, and I feel like I'm still the same in a lot of ways. But I remember when I was 22
Hmm.
years old, and I think this was like in the summertime, I had worked in Rhinebeck, New York, in this camp. Because it was in sessions, like towards the end of the session, we would all go to New York. And like, I went with my girlfriend. Yeah,
New
New
York
York City,
City.
because I think it was like 3 hours from upstate New York. So we
Hmm.
go to New York, and I'm like at a convenience store. I'm 22 years old. I'm wearing like a cute little romper from Guess or whatever. And then I come to
Hmm.
go get, I think like a drink. And then these men kind of look at me, and then I can hear them earshot, and one of them was just like, oh, she looks good in plaid, to which the other man was like, oh, well, she would look good with nothing on. And I'm
Oh
like
my goodness.
it,
People are
bold. And I
bold.
didn't say anything because I'm just like, I'm not in Providence. And you just feel,
You're not in a
yeah, you
familiar
just
place.
feel
Yeah.
degraded. I also remember a time, I mean, I have so many countless examples, but I
Yeah. All the cat calling that women
yeah.
experience on a regular basis
But
is
I
just
think a
crazy.
more personal example that happened too. I remember when I was in high school. This was before everybody was going natural. I would say I was the first person in a while to go natural. I think I went natural in 2008,
Hmm.
and I had the courage to wear my teeny weeny afro. So obviously it was a shock because I went to a Catholic school. You got you got your long weave and your wigs at the time. I mean, people don't wear lace fronts at that time, but to go from straight hair or to braids to straight up teeny weeny afro. And, I would take the bus because where I went to high school was like 15 minutes away, but often the Providence kids would have to take the bus. And I remember taking the bus back to go home. And, there were a group of guys that went to my school. I think a couple of them were a little bit younger than me. And they were kind of rating girls, like upperclassmen girls. And I heard them again, earshot. And I think my name came
Mm.
up, and he was just like, she used to be so beautiful, but once she cut her hair, it just turned me off. It's like, and I,
Wow. Well, you
yeah,
overheard
and I
him
was just
saying this?
like, wow, like, and again, what you look like though,
What is it with men rating
it's
women?
just, but
Like,
it's like, again,
I don't get it.
we can rate people till the cows come home, but if you got shitty character, come on now,
Yeah.
like, let's talk about that. And I think as we're getting older, at least for me, I know the same thing for you, sis. I don't care what you look like. I care about how you treat people, how you present yourself. And are you a good person? Because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, when
Yeah.
God forbid people die, who gonna come into your funeral? You gonna give them a rating? Are you gonna give them a rating? Like from one to what,
No,
like
can't
what was
no.
your character like? You know what
No.
I'm saying? So yeah, just stupid
Yeah.
stuff like that. And just also in the workplace, because I've had I have some, or I had like one black friend that I was really close to, black male. Like we talked a lot, and I just felt like he did me dirty. And, I was really disappointed because I thought this was going to be someone that was a forever friend. And it turned out like that they weren't, and they didn't have integrity. But, I just feel like I'm the type of person, like, I ride hard for my family and for my friends. And if I mess with you, I mess with you.
Mhm.
And, I'm in community with you. And I think
Mhm.
that's what we need more of, especially during this time, even though we're out of the pandemic. But you know what I mean? I feel like I'm going on a diatribe. But what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
I think it's really important for people to be honest. And again, to me, treat people with love and care and respect, because I hate when people are like, oh, if this, say if this was your daughter or your son. No, no, no. You should treat people with respect because of who they are. Not,
Because they have
yes,
humanity. They're a
and
human
yes,
being.
dignity and value. Not because what you look like, but who, like you said,
Mhm.
you're, because of your essence and who you are. So the rating system always ticks me off, and it's just like, do these people really say that,
It's
like
immature.
in real life?
Like Kevin Samuels, isn't this man like 50 something years old rating people? Like, don't you have anything else to do? Like, I don't, who does that? Like, you're not 15 in high school. Like, maybe I give you a pass, but you can't be a grown ass 50-year-old man doing that kind of
But
stuff
again, it's
online.
profitable,
But I also didn't understand women calling in or
sis.
whatever, sending them his pictures to be ridiculed in that way.
I didn't
Like,
understand it too.
have some standards for yourself, and like look at the person who's rating you. What scale are they on? It's just like,
Yeah, it's
I don't
just
know, it's
weird.
the
And again,
toxicity.
with the manosphere, for those who are listening who don't know what that is, the manosphere really, I mean, it's been around for a while, but really came to popularity, I think, in the early, or no, 2020 with Kevin Samuels. He didn't coin the term, but it's all about men's improvement. But you often see them on YouTube. There's a whole like spectrum of men. And, there are some healthy, quote unquote, manosphere dudes that really talk about, manhood and how to be better. But then, there's a whole pendulum swung, like a Kevin Samuels, the Fresh and Fits, who, um, it's not so positive for the Black community, to me.
And you've also educated me on, is it called misogynoir? Can you like just explain what
Yes.
that is?
So when we think about misogyny, we think about like hatred of women. But especially when we talk about the manosphere or the extreme manosphere men, there is a sense of misogynoir. So like hatred towards Black women. And I think that often talks, I think it often centers on what you were talking about too. If you don't have to physically harm a woman to cause damage to a woman, you
Yeah.
can
Hmm.
psychologically mess up their psyche. And it's so interesting too, because like I said, we all have some really deep traumas and hurt. So just think about the story that you just told us. Like, you were 19 years old, you're 38, and this thing still, still bothers you. So I'm just like, to go
Hmm.
on these platforms and really like do some psychological harm to women or even men, because I've seen some dudes like, oh, Kevin Samuels in the manosphere, they talk about Black men too. And it's just like, regardless, it's harmful. You know what I mean? We really got
It
to
is.
watch what we say. So,
Yeah. And I was actually, doing some research in preparing for this episode and reading some stuff. And I came across this interesting interview with Gabrielle Union, the actress, and Tarana Burke, who's the founder of the Me Too
mhm.
movement. And in the interview, so Tarana was interviewing Gabrielle, and she asked Gabrielle point blank, like, who protects Black women? And Gabrielle said bluntly,
Of
Black
course.
women. And I thought, you know what? That is so true. It's us. We're protecting our sisters, in their time of need. Typically, it's us who come to the forefront and say, this isn't
Yeah.
acceptable. and there are black men that do it too, but I feel like it's usually black women at the forefront because I think we feel it so innately and so
Mm,
personally that it's like an insult. Usually an insult to one of us is an insult to
yeah,
all of us.
yeah,
So I just thought that was interesting, but I think another part of this conversation is, to explore is what does protecting black women
yeah,
actually look like as it relates to black men? Because I remember, and not to beat a dead horse, we'll just talk about this quickly, like the Will Smith Oscar incident. After that happened, I saw a lot of things on social media, and I believe you and I had a conversation about this, and I think we may have been on different sides of the argument, that a lot of people were saying this was an example of a black man protecting his black wife. So we say, oh, protect black women all the time, and this is what he was doing, and he's getting shamed for it and ostracized for it. And I didn't disagree, because for me as a woman, I that's not the kind of protection I necessarily
yeah.
want. And I know you felt differently, so
Yeah, I mean, that happened almost like a year ago. So I mean, I feel like I've have differences, but I mean,
mhm.
I don't disagree with somebody saying, "Yo, you got to defend your wife. Like he talked crazy to your wife. You got to show him." But then I'm also like, okay, well, Chris Rock is like what a buck 60. Will Smith is like 6'3". Like why
And she wasn't
go
in
harm?
physically
You know,
any danger, even though, like we said, it's psychological safety and physical safety when we talk about
And I
protect
talked
black
to one
women.
of my
But
friends who was black, and he was just like, I would have just pulled him to the side and been like, cut that out, or I'm gonna beat your ass. Like,
yeah, that's the
yeah,
way
he was
my
like,
husband would have
he's like,
handled
I
it.
would have just
Yeah.
pulled him to the side and been like, stop. You know what I mean? So I think there's different variables. It was a poor, tasteless joke. I think,
Hmm.
Will Smith, from what he said in his biography and stuff like that, that he because his dad beat on his mom, that
And he felt he didn't protect
exactly. But
her.
it's interesting, right?
It's like generational trauma. It cuts deep, and it's like, as black people, it's so hard because it feels like we're so
Yeah.
hurt
Yeah, no,
all
but
the time. And I really want to get to a place of joy, but that's part of our history. We have to, and this is what you need to deal with trauma, or else it comes back decades later and manifests itself in different ways that aren't necessarily healthy and that are potentially toxic
yeah.
to you.
And I think it's so
So,
interesting, right? Because Will Smith, like you said, trauma manifests in many different ways. So in his way, I need to fight. I need to fight physically
mhm,
to show like you not messing with my wife. And I think
that I'm
my wife,
protecting a
whereas
black
like
woman, yeah.
it seems like often with women, it's just like, no, your words, your affirmations, different ways of it doesn't have to be like I'm gonna beat your ass for you to feel like,
Mhm.
hey, yeah. So I think
Protected.
that's like an interesting dichotomy right there. And I think also like what you're saying too, like there's different ways that women should feel protected. I think for me, I think it depends like if a scenario comes up like if someone is saying a rude joke or just holding somebody accountable and being like, yo, like that's not cool. I'm gonna need you to stop this right now. And I think that kind of just shows
Yeah,
people,
and in the moment, correcting the
yeah, just
behavior
like
in
how
the
we
moment.
tell our white brothers and sisters when people are saying some racist stuff to cut it out. We black women, black
Mhm.
people, we need to cut out the misogynoir and also just
We can't be silent when we see
yes,
this
because it's
nonsense
not
happening.
right. And I think by somebody not saying something in the moment, it almost like, encourages the behavior. And it's not no locker room talk or, that nonsense. Like call it out for what it
Mhm.
is. It's foolishness. But I
Yeah.
also wanted to highlight like the
Yeah.
different ways that black women aren't protected. So I know we had talked about police brutality and just ongoing discrimination, but oftentimes we talk about like maternal mortality, and often how Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy related causes than white women. Like, I even think about the story of Serena Williams, right? When she had her first child. And despite being a mega millionaire now, saying, like, listen, there is something deeply wrong. And luckily, she was able to birth her baby. But again, like us not being believed or taken seriously. And I see a lot of tragic news that happens via TikTok or Twitter or wherever you get your social media needs from, where Black women are just dying while they're carrying their child. I think we often talked about sexual violence as well, and often just how women, and I'm sure especially Black women, don't feel shame already. So don't really feel, once they do feel like they have the courage to disclose, like not feeling believed. And that's one way that we don't feel protected. Again, wage inequality. So like Black women are often paid less than their white male and female counterparts. So I think I wanted to highlight the other ways that Black women are not feeling protected as well.
So, what do you think we can do to ensure that Black women feel safe and feel like people have their
Mm.
backs?
I think I think it just always starts with your local context in your community. And like Sada said, I know you have Black child, Black son, we have Black brothers and stuff like that. But I think if you have friends that are platonic who are also Black men, like just really having real authentic conversations about just the ways that we love each other, but we've also harmed each other, and like seeking to do right. We can't change what we can't see or we don't know. So I think just starting from there. And then to me, all behavior is learned, but behavior can be changed. So, if I'm having a
Hmm.
conversation with a Black man that I'm in community with that I love, and I have expressed to them that I felt harmed by them saying X, Y, and Z, not to shame them, but just to be like, next time, can you just be careful and maybe not say that in my presence? So I think that's kind of like that
Yeah.
accountability piece. I think another thing that we can do too is support Black women with their businesses. I think oftentimes
In leadership roles in
leadership
politics. Yeah.
roles, policy, reading the books, listening to Black women in their stories. I think also too, and I know we talked about it a little bit, but I think oftentimes, especially when we see Black police brutality and Black men dying in the hands of the police, that is very real. And I never want to negate that. But also, Black women also die in the hands of the police. And I think supporting that as well and amplifying those stories, I think would be a start. How about you?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with everything you said. And I think in our own personal lives, we can, like we said before, make sure to call out that behavior even more. And not when only men do it, because women can do it to each
Oh,
other
yeah.
too. So I think whether you're in the workplace advocating for someone, especially when they're not in the room, I think it's very important, and learning to advocate for yourself. And I know there are risks to that in a traditional working environment, but if you see
Say
something,
something.
say something,
Yes.
to borrow the old term, but like, because then you allow that culture to fester. It becomes a part of the culture, this kind of disrespect, this kind of not valuing people from diverse backgrounds, or particularly Black women in the workplace. It becomes
That's
tolerated,
right.
and it can never be tolerated, because once it becomes tolerated, it becomes the status
Yeah.
quo. So I think just having more agency in our own lives when we see this kind of behavior, to call it out. And I wish people didn't support these manospheric dudes who are profiting off of disrespecting Black women,
They
women in
hurt too.
general. I like, it's the voyeurs, yeah, they are hurt, because only hurt people would do something like that. I mean, I don't, I like my reality shows, my Real Housewives and all this kind of stuff, but I'm not like following these people on YouTube and amplifying their voice and giving them a platform. It's like watching a train wreck, but like people just like it, and it just creates this vicious cycle
Cause
that
the shit
keeps going
because the
and
shit went.
going. And maybe we need to counter that representation with more positive representation, more positive discussions that uplift Black
Yes, and
women.
that's what I think 2020, if it hasn't taught us anything, because everybody was at home. But I don't know about you. I've seen more
Hmm.
podcasts, especially from Black women, all within the
Yeah.
diaspora. So that's why I feel like we're also just creating positive change. Going back to, if you see say something. I know I have. I'm not gonna lie and sit here and say that I haven't had some things that I had to unlearn about, like my trauma with Black men, and I'm doing better and I'm getting better. But I think in
Hmm.
regards to like being in community, I remember at my last job that I worked with, I will always put my black brothers and sisters on. So there was this one woman that was saying some problematic stuff, and I was friends with her. And I just did not like how she was treating one of our co-workers who was our supervisor, who was a black man. She
So
was
who
like,
was
she
sh
was,
okay, the
yeah,
man was what?
yeah, she
She
was
was
white,
white.
he was black, and just straight
Mhm.
disrespecting him. Like, I didn't like it because, as y'all have heard in previous episodes, microaggressions, regardless who you are, can be tough. So, I pulled
Mhm.
friend to the side and I was just like, listen, you might not think it looks like this, but as a black woman, this is how it looks like, and you need to be careful.
Mhm. So did she
Oh,
correct
she
the
corrected
behavior
it
from there?
quick. Her corrected it quick. Next day, I guess she told him, "Oh, I'm sorry." And
Yeah. And it took courage. I'm sure it took courage for you to do that. Or, some people might not have the courage to do that in that context. But I think taking those kinds of actions is helpful, even though it's small, like all these little small things come up to can have a big impact
yeah,
ultimately if we each do our little part in our little
yeah,
corner of the
have
world.
my back. And it's not even just having my back. I'll scratch your back, but it's just for me. It's the right thing to do, And like, not everybody has the bravery, like you said. But again, like you said, those small little action
Mm-hmm.
steps does matter. So.